One of the most interesting things about Cubase 12 is the fact that Steinberg decided to integrate the Dolby Atmos workflow into their main digital audio workstation, which is primarily targeted at music production. I therefore felt it is time to create another Getting Started with Dolby Atmos video. So if you are a Cubase user and you want to know how to use Dolby Atmos in Cubase, this is the video for you. And if you are a Nuendo user, there are still a couple of things in here that might interest you because the workflow in Cubase and the workflow in Nuendo are slightly different. And there are also a couple of new things that Steinberg integrated into their Dolby Atmos workflow, and these new things will make their way into the next Nuendo release. So some of the things are a little bit of a preview what's going to come in Nuendo 12. But before I go any further, first of all, hello everybody. My name is Michael Wagner. I teach at the Antoinette Westphal College of Media Arts and Design at Drexel University in Philadelphia. And on this channel, I talk about digital media, game design, and spatial audio. And if any of those topics interest you, I invite you to subscribe or join my Discord community, and invite link is in the description below. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment sections below. And with that being said, let's get right into Cubase 12. Now, the way I'm going to start today is by using a very simple sample project. Now, if you are following my videos and you've watched my videos on how to create game audio with Unity and Vice, you might recognize this tune. This is essentially the tune that we used for the immersive music piece. So let's just have a brief listen. Now, in case you're wondering, this is essentially something that comes out of the Elastic Player demo bank, Elastic Player that is from Überschall, and the demo bank that they provide with the Elastic Player actually has a very liberal licensing agreement, so you can actually even use that for commercial purposes. So let's just have a brief listen through the individual tracks so that we know what we are talking about. Well, first of all, we have a kick and snare. And then we have hi-hats. And then we have three types of pads. The first pad, it's a very ethereal, quiet pad. Then a second one. And then a third one. Then we have a bass. And then we have keys, or a synth really. And finally, the piano. This is the entire loop. So what we're going to do is we're going to convert that into a Dolby Atmos loop. And in order to do that, the first thing we need to do is we need to figure out what exactly is Dolby Atmos. So let's talk about Dolby Atmos for a second. Now, I already did a couple of videos on Dolby Atmos, and I'm going to post some links in the description below. So I'm not going to go into too many details. However, just to give you the essence of what Dolby Atmos is, Dolby Atmos is essentially a hybrid audio format that combines a very traditional channel-based component. These are called the so-called Dolby Atmos pads with an object-based components. These are the so-called Dolby Atmos objects. And the key is that these objects are stored not only in terms of the sound, they're also stored in terms of the position these objects have. Just think about a bird flying around in space. What you would do in a Dolby Atmos setup is you would store the sound that this bird makes in addition to the position where the bird actually is. And that allows you to render the audio with respect to whatever speaker setup you have. So in contrast to a traditional audio format where everything is rendered in advance during production, in a Dolby Atmos setup, you're actually rendering everything at the endpoint at the consumer device, and it gives you a lot of flexibility and a lot of possibilities to optimize your sound experience for the particular type of consumer device or endpoint device that you actually have. And this is really the key to Dolby Atmos. So this differentiation between the channel-based components that is very, very traditional and these object-based components, which allow you to be very, very flexible and render everything with respect to a particular speaker setup. Now, the first thing we need to do if we want to turn our little loop into a Dolby Atmos loop is add the Dolby Atmos renderer. The Dolby Atmos renderer will be responsible for turning our project into a Dolby Atmos master file that we can then use to play back on a consumer device that is capable of playing back Dolby Atmos. And there are different ways how we can do that. We could, for example, just put that Dolby Atmos renderer onto the master bus of our little project. However, the master bus is only stereo, and I want to have a little bit more flexibility in terms of monitoring. So what I generally do is I create a separate Dolby Atmos master bus. So let's just do that. So we're going to add a group track, and this group track is going to be a 7.1.4 track, because that is sort of the standards, the channel configuration for Dolby Atmos, at least for the home theater version of Dolby Atmos. And we are going to call that Atmos bus. And let's add that track. And then we are going to go into the inserts of that track, and we are going to add the Dolby Atmos renderer. Let's just search for Dolby, and it comes up with the renderer for Dolby Atmos, and here we are. This is the renderer for Dolby Atmos. Now, if you're new to Dolby Atmos, you might be a little bit confused about what's going on here. Essentially, what you have in Dolby Atmos is you have a total of 128 channels, or a maximum of 128 channels. Some of these channels will be associated with bed channels. Some of them will be associated with objects. Now, in general, the first 10 channels are the initial bed. So that is sort of reserved for the bed, so that you essentially have a total number, a maximum number of 118 objects. This will become a little bit clearer once we route everything. Now, we essentially also have the option to downmix. So, for example, if we want to monitor our audio in 7.1.4, we would essentially set that here to 7.1.4. That's essentially what I'm doing right now. But we can also use the downmix version or the downmix function in the Dolby Atmos renderer to downmix. And for those of you who have been watching my videos, you might be very excited to see that we now have a binaural rendering option. So the Dolby Atmos renderer is now also capable not only of rendering in stereo or 5.1, 7.1, and 5.1.4. It can also monitor in binaural mode, and that essentially means that is a mode that's specifically optimized for headphone use, and that has been completely missing from Windows-based Dolby Atmos solutions. So a lot of people were actually looking forward to that, and if you watched my channel, you know that there are a couple of videos that I did on how to get around that limitation that we have in Windows, that we couldn't use or we couldn't run a binaural renderer. Now, with Cubase 12 and also with Nuendo 12 that's going to come out in the near future, this is gone now. We now have the option to do binaural rendering. That's good. That's pretty cool. Now, there's one important comment that I need to make, and that is that Dolby Atmos requires a certain sample rate and a certain buffer size. So if you don't have the required sample rates and buffer sizes, the Dolby Atmos renderer will come up with a warning that it cannot be run, or it cannot process because of the mismatch in the sample rate and the buffer size. Now, what you essentially need is you need in the project settings, you need to make sure that you have the sample rate set to 48 kilohertz. That's the one thing. And in the settings of the studio, so essentially in the audio driver settings, you need to make sure, I have the ASIO for all driver here, so you need to essentially make sure that the buffer size is either 512 or 1024. If you don't have it set up like that, it will essentially not work. It will give you an error and you cannot use Dolby Atmos. But it's very simple to simply change those settings to make sure that everything is set up correctly. Now, with that out of the way, there's one more thing we need to set, and that is essentially we need to tell Cubase that we want to use Dolby Atmos, and this is done in the project settings. So if we go to the project menu, there's one additional menu item that we have now, and this is called the ADM authoring for Dolby Atmos, and we need to make sure that we have set up everything correctly in this particular panel. So let's just open that up. And the first thing we need to do is we need to tell Cubase what type of renderer we are going to use. And as you can see, in Cubase, you actually only have one option, and that is the internal renderer for Dolby Atmos. If you're working with Nuendo, you would have additional options for external renderer. So you can, for example, use that in connection with the Dolby Atmos production suite or the Dolby Atmos mastering suite. But in Cubase, you essentially are limited to the internal renderer, which, quite frankly, for most of the use cases that we have in music production is perfectly fine. So we need to set the renderer here, and essentially the next thing we need to do is we need to add the bed. So we need to specify what tracks are bed tracks and what tracks are object tracks. So let's first look into creating a bed, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of the channels or some of the tracks that I have here and combine them into an Dolby Atmos bed. Now, Dolby Atmos bed traditionally are 10 channel tracks, so this is traditionally a 7.1.2, and how you set it up or what you define to be in your bed is completely up to you. It's sort of the bed is supposed to be the ambient sound that is around you, whereas the objects are the things that are moving. So in a movie setting, this is very obvious. So the ambient sound would be the bed, and kind of, for example, the bird. Coming back to that example of the bird that is flying around would be the object. Now, when it comes to music production, there's a lot of flexibility that you have because there is essentially no rules in terms of what is going to be part of your bed and what is going to be an object. You could technically even create Dolby Atmos music that has no bed at all and just only objects. That's perfectly fine as well. Would make sense, actually. Now, in my particular case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply take the two drum tracks, so the kick and snare and the hi-hats and the three pads. I'm going to use them as the bed in my production here. And in order to be able to do that, the first thing I need to do is I need to create a bed track. And this bed track, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the maximum number of channels possible. Once again, in Dolby Atmos, the beds can be up to 10 channels. So I'm going to add a 10-channel group track. This is going to be a 7.1.2 track. And let's call that the Atmos bed. And let's add that here. Let's just move that up so that we have everything organized neatly. And this is going to serve as my Dolby Atmos bed. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm simply going to route all the individual tracks into the Dolby Atmos bed, and we're going to kind of change the objects later on. So let's just add that and let's just route everything in there. So let's do that. Let's go through all of them. As I'm adding these tracks, as I'm routing them to the bed track, you actually see that the panning changes to the stereo, from the stereo panning to a panning window that is essentially an Atmos panner. So I've now routed all the individual tracks into the Dolby Atmos bed, and I'm now ready to route them into the Dolby Atmos renderer. Now this is done by going to the project, ADM authoring for Dolby Atmos panel. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add the bed. So I'm going to add a bed track, and the source track for this bed is going to be the Atmos bed here. So let's click on that, and that will then essentially route the bed track, which is this group track, into the Dolby Atmos bed channels of the Dolby Atmos renderer. So if we are opening up the Dolby Atmos renderer, so let's go to the renderer here. We essentially see that the bed is already assigned. All 10 channels of the bed are assigned here. And if I'm now playing everything, I should actually hear everything because everything is now routed through to the Dolby Atmos bed. Now currently I only see action at the first two channels, and that is because all the tracks that I'm having are stereo tracks. So in order to make it a little bit more interesting, what I want to do is I want to move the position of those objects slightly. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through these panners and for the kick, and once again there are no rules to that, I'm just doing it in one way. You can do it any way that makes sense to you. So for the kick, what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply bring them in a little bit so that we have a little bit of action on the center channel. And I'm also going to move a little bit of the audio to the LFE channel, which is the low frequency effects channel, which is not to be confused with the subwoofer. So it doesn't really have the function of a subwoofer, or it's not really kind of the low frequency channel, but it's sort of really an effects channel in Dolby Atmos speak, but we can use it for that purpose. So I'm just going to move a little bit of audio in here just so that we have some action on the Dolby Atmos LFE channel. And then I'm going to go to the hi-hats. Well, let's leave the hi-hats where they are. Well, actually, let's move them back a bit. So I'm going to move them slightly back and maybe a little bit upwards. Next, let's position the pads, and I'm going to just kind of move them around a little so that we have a little bit of variation in there. I just want to make sure that all the 10 channels in the bed are actually active. So let's go to the first pad here. Well, actually, let's leave it where it is. Let's just change the second one and let's move that back a little. Maybe let's move that to the back completely, and then the third one. Let's have that more to the left and right, and maybe let's just move it up again a little bit. So just a little bit. Okay, so now I essentially have them positioned in different spaces or different places on a three-dimensional space. So if I now play everything and I'm looking at the Dolby Atmos renderer, so let's go back to the renderer here. I should actually have all 10 channels active because all of them are, because essentially sound is dispersed across the three-dimensional space. And I essentially see that all these individual tracks are active, the left, right, the center, the LFE, and the surrounds, the back, and the top speakers. Everything is active. Okay, so now we have the pad completed. So the next thing I want to do is I want to turn our 3 main tracks, so that was the bass track, the synth track, and the keys, into objects. So let's just do that. And the way this is done is by going once again into the ADM authoring for Dolby Atmos. And what we want to do is we want to add objects. Now we have 3 objects, which are our 3 tracks. So let's just kind of add 3 objects. And what we're going to do is we're going to select the source tracks. Now the first one is going to be the, where are we? The bass. The second one is going to be the synth, and the third one is going to be the keys. So let's now go into the Dolby Atmos renderer and see how that looks in the renderer. So let's open up our renderer again, and here we are. And now we see that we not only have the pad channels active, we also have the object channels active. Now, we only did 3 objects, but we see 6 objects active actually, and that is because each track that we assigned to be an object was actually a stereo track. And the way the renderer handles that is as 2 separate objects for left channel and right channel. So these 3 tracks became 6 objects in our Dolby Atmos renderer. And if we now play everything, we essentially see all these objects active. And we also see the way these objects are dispersed in our 3-dimensional space. Currently there is nothing that we did to the position of this object. So everything is essentially centered at the left and right corners of our 3-dimensional space. So as a next step, just kind of let's change the position of our individual objects. So let's close that thing here. And let's go into the bass, and let's change the bass to be, I don't know, let's move it more to the side. So let's move that up a little bit maybe, and let's move that back. And as we can see, whatever we are going to do in the panning device is also going to be represented in the Dolby Atmos renderer. So if we're moving the object around, we actually see that object also moving in the Dolby Atmos renderer. And once again, once we export that file, the render will actually not only export the audio, it will also export the entire path, the entire whatever automation that we use with the object position, so that the final rendering is done on the actual endpoint device. So so that's the first one. Let's do the synth. Here we are. And let's keep that in the front, that's fine. But what we're going to do is we're going to change the object size. With objects, we can actually also change the size. That essentially means the renderer treats the objects as something that is that has a larger dimension. So it's not only a point source, it's actually kind of something that is an entire that is emitted from an entire spherical surrounding area. And we can essentially also automate all these things in Dolby Atmos. So, and the final thing is, let's go into the keys and let's move that maybe to back. I'm just kind of doing a couple of things here, and maybe also change the object size a little, and maybe, I don't know, bring that in a little, so that we have a little bit of variation here. And we can also see that this change in positioning is now represented in our Dolby Atmos renderer. And if we play everything, we also see the objects active. And we essentially see the position of the objects, we see the size of the objects, and we see the intensity of the individual objects. And that's really everything that we need to do. And we now can go about automating all these position data. We can automate everything really in the Dolby Atmos renderer. And that's all there is to it. So there's one final thing we need to do and that is we need to export our project in Dolby Atmos format. And this is not done through the traditional rendering in Cubase. This is actually done through the Adm authoring panel. So let's go into the Adm authoring panel here under Project tab, Adm authoring, and here we have the export Adm file, and this is essentially what we need to do if we want to create the Dolby Atmos file, the final deliverable. So let's click on export and let's call that Atmos test, and the format that it's going to use is the broadcast wave format. There are a couple of different Dolby Atmos formats. Cubase as well as Nuendo only support ADM, the broadcast wave format. However, there are a couple of tools that you can use in order to convert it into other Dolby Atmos formats. So if in case you need an Atmos file bundle as a deliverable for a streaming service, you can actually do that with the tools. And I did a couple of videos on how to do that, and I put some links in the description below. And if you have any questions, just shoot me a comment in the comment section, or once again, join my Discord community. But essentially, we want to simply export it as a broadcast wave format. We call it Atmos test. So let's just save that. I already did that once, so I need to replace that. And that's now going to process everything. It's going to take all the audio. It's going to take all the positional information. It's going to take all the individual automations that we might have done on the positional data, and it's going to combine that into this broadcast wave format that can then be played on a Dolby Atmos capable consumer device. Now, as you can see, this is actually very simple to do. So if you're a Cubase 12 user, there's nothing that prevents you from playing around with Dolby Atmos. It's actually a lot of fun. Very easy to do, very straightforward, very accessible. Steinberg actually did an excellent job in integrating that into Cubase, and I'm already looking forward into what they will do with Nuendo, because now that we have Dolby Atmos in Cubase, the question is what else are we going to get in Nuendo? And I'm really hoping that in Nuendo we're going to get access to the full Dolby Atmos capabilities. So not only the home theater version, which is limited to 7.1.4, but actually kind of something that is a little bit more aligned with what the Dolby Atmos mastering suite is capable of doing, but we will see. Now, this is really everything I wanted to say today. If you enjoyed that video, please don't forget to press the like button. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below or join my Discord community. Invite link in the description below. And with that being said, see you at the next video.